Hi everyone, today is Thursday, February 17th, and this is the Cluster API Provider Azure office hours. If you are joining us for the first time and you need access to this doc, you need to join the SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list. As always, please add any discussion topics to the agenda. Be respectful of everyone. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. We do follow the CNCF Code of Conduct, and also, if you can, please add your name to the attendee list. With that said, let's get started. So we have a code walkthrough today, but first, if there's anyone who is new and would like to say hi and introduce themselves, now is your chance. I will mute and see if everyone else wants to speak up. Okay, I guess no one new today. All right, let's skip forward and I guess let's start with the code walkthrough. Jonathan, are you ready?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, so if you want, I'll stop sharing and I'll make you co-host so you can share your screen. Does that work?
All right, sounds good.
Awesome.
Okay.
Let's go.
It says it's disabled.
Yeah, I just made you co-host. Try again. It should be
okay, sounds good. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. So here's where we can start for the code walkthrough for the async services. So in the reconcile loop for all the services, here's the Azure cluster ones. We wanted to make it so that when you are waiting on a service to get back to you, you don't have to just return and start over. Or no, you don't have to just wait and be stuck in this loop, because otherwise you wouldn't have any feedback until like, for example, security oops is finished. So what we did with the async services is we made it so that when a create or delete long operation starts, it'll return a future, and then we can return that value and exit out of the loop, and then we can start over again. So that way we don't have to be waiting until we get a result back. So we went ahead and created several interfaces to replace the old client functions in the Azure services. We have a future handler, getter, creator, deleter, and reckoner. So several functions we made, like process ongoing operation. It takes in a future. So when we have a long operation going on, we try to get a state from it. And if we can find it, we try to check if it's done.
Did we lose Jonathan?
Said connecting to audio, so.
Yeah, I think he lost his audio.
What?
Yeah, I thought it was just me as well. Jonathan, we still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. So inside our create resource function, we use this to create an interface for creating resources. So we pass in a spec, and then this applies for any service. So when we go into here, we call our creator interface to see if there's an existing resource. If there is, we can just return it. And then if not, we can get the parameters based on that spec. And if the parameters tell us that it's nothing to do, we just return. And if there is something to do, we can call creator update async, which is one of the interface functions. And then it returns a future, and then we can return that so we don't have to wait on the result. And then similarly for delete resource, we try to check if there's an operation going on. If there is, we try to check if it's done. And if there isn't an operation, we can go ahead and start. And so we try to call delete async, get a future, set the operation, and if the resource isn't there, we don't return an error and we can break. And so we also have a resource getter spec interface. So let me pull that up. So this interface is another interface that we made to help us out with the async services. So a resource spec getter will give us the resource name, the owner resource name, and the resource group name, so we can identify any resource. So for example, a subnet has its name, the name of the VNet it's a part of, and the name of the resource group. And then we have the parameters. And so the parameters function will return the parameters for the Azure SDK. And so by having this implementation, not only do we get to have asynchronous services, but we also clean up the code a lot. So let me show an example of a refactored async service. So here, for example, is the Bastion host service. So in our spec function file, we move the spec struct from types.go into the service itself. And here we can define all the information we need. And we use this to implement the interface. So we have resource name, resource group name, and owner resource name. And a lot of the times there isn't an owner resource, so we just return a blank string. And so here we have the parameters. So in the parameters function, we take in an existing interface. If the interface isn't nil, we try to cast it to check. And if it is a Bastion host, then we can return nil. So otherwise, we construct the parameters. So here's a network.bastion host, which is what we'd use in the client. So these are the values we just brought over from what we had before. And then in the client functions, we implement get, creator update async, delete async, is done, result. And so in creator update async, it's pretty straightforward based on what we showed before. It's pretty similar to what the create function did before. So we get a create feature instead of just a result. And then we try to wait for the completion ref. And if there is a result we can get, then we can return it. And otherwise we return the future. So in the delete async function, it's pretty similar. We try to call delete using the client. And then in is done, we try to check to see if the operation is finished. And then in result, we try to resolve the future result. And so in this refactored code, when we get to the reconcile part, it becomes extremely simple. So all we have to do is put in the spec getter, and then we try to get the spec. If it exists, then all we have to do is call s.createResource. And that way our code is much cleaner here, and also our code is much easier to test. Because in this case, we don't have to worry about testing anything related to the spec. We can just have one line that returns a result or an error if it works or not. And most of these errors won't depend on the spec, because the generation of the spec and the parameters is in the spec files. So that's an example of a service where you only have one resource, and I'll show you an example of a service where we have multiple resources. So for example, in network interfaces, we return a list of the specs. So we handle this a little bit differently. So we go through the list and we try to create resource for everyone. But currently, if we have multiple errors, we return the one that we consider to be most important. So the error, and we left this in the comments, so it would be easy to reference, but we would return, first we return operation not done error, an error creating, well, first we'd return an error creating, creating in progress error, or no error. So this is the logic we have for checking the error types, and we're also thinking about adding some new, like an additional interface or something for handling errors, because in the future we might have more complicated error handling, and we might not want to just check two types. So in general, these are the very simple cases for refactoring, but there are also some that are a bit more complicated. For example, in inbound NAT rules, we have to be able to get the existing rules first in order to construct the specs. And for example, in the VM service, there's still, we create the resource, but we still have to set a lot of functions based on the result. But in general, this refactor cleans up a lot of the code and also allows us to get a lot more feedback in this loop, because we don't have to wait for every function to finish before we can exit the reconcile function. Does anyone have any questions?
Jonathan, Ashutosh, I think you had your hand raised earlier. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around one particular stuff. For example, we have this creator update. So in case when the resource exists, we are simply returning, like, how are we gonna patch the resource if it is required? For example, how are we gonna update the resource?
Yeah. So if it exists, we don't return it just yet. And if it exists, we go into the parameters to determine.
Oh yes, I see.
If we need to return or not. So a lot of the times we don't need to look into anything. We just see if it exists, and we can return. But for some of the other services, I think subnets, wait, no, I don't think it's subnets, but pretty much we could check, I thought there was something in the subnet service, but so we could check whatever we needed before we return it. Otherwise, we could just break out of here and just do the update.
Makes sense. Yeah. So you're saying that if we feel that there is some update that we want to do, maybe we do not return even if the resource exists.
Yeah, so let me try to,
notice.
yeah, let me find an example actually. Okay, so it looks like in the load balancers parameters, if we get an existing resource, we cast it. And if it's the correct type, we try to figure out if all the front-end IPs, load balancing rules, back-end address pools, outbound rules, and probes are up to date. And if we don't need to update anything, we return. Otherwise, we go in and create a new spec, and then we return that. Or we create the new parameters. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. That answers the question.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I don't have any question, but one specific comment. I think we were talking about that in one of the PR that I was doing. So like the spec getter, maybe, we want to actually, do some changes that allows us to fetch arbitrary fields. Because there are fields that, does not go into that spec getter, and we have to actually fetch couple of details by doing an API call, and then that needs to be passed. So, right now what I did as a workaround is like, I'm just passing all those details that I need as an argument, and then setting it into the spec itself. So, I mean, it looks a little weird, but it just works for a while. Maybe we could, discuss it on a discussion or an open issue. How to
I think you bring up a good point. Sometimes it's not that easy to factor in the specs, because before, a lot of times we would just get everything we needed in a loop. So like, this is an example for inbound NAT rules where we had to fetch the existing rules first in order to call the specs. So which PR, which was the part in your PR, by the way? I don't have it open right now, but
yeah, let me just give me a moment.
Yeah, if you have any questions on how to do the refactor stuff, Cecile and I are happy to answer that too.
Matt, you have a question?
Yeah, pardon me. Where are we at overall? Are we done now with the refactoring? We still have a few services that we want to make async.
I think we have 3 left, but we're almost there pretty much.
Sweet.
There is a shrinking issue. If you want to take a look at that, I'll link it. That has all those services and checkboxes for the ones already done.
Yeah, we have.
I knew it was out there. I'm just being lazy. Thanks.
Yeah, we have PRs open for all of them, I think.
Pasted the link in chat.
Oh, okay.
Shyam, you have a question?
More of a comment than a question. So one thing I've observed after making the async changes is that in logs, we often see like errors saying that it is like it's still pending to reconcile. So for a new user, this might be a little off-putting. So should we add some documentation or anything to say, hey, this is not like the resource has failed during creation, it's just like expanding creation, something like that.
Sorry, could you repeat that? Let me turn on my volume.
So when I look at the logs, the reconciler logs, I see that there'll be like lots of errors, right? Because it'll try to reconcile and if the resource is not created, you see it's still the controller returns saying, hey, it's still pending creation.
Yeah.
So I know if we read the logs carefully, we know that there's nothing wrong going on, but when I first look at it, it seems like something has gone wrong. So it might be useful if we add some pointers for the user saying
Yeah.
this is like expected.
Yeah. I think the operation not done error could be a little confusing, especially since it's listed as an error when we're just waiting. So I think that's could go into what Cecile and I were talking about with adding some more like an interface or something to handle the error precedence, or like returning a list of errors, so that way we can maybe like add logs or something if we have an operation not done, to say that, by the way, we're just waiting, it's not necessarily broken.
And another thing about that is we mark all the not done errors as transient errors. And in the controllers, we should be handling those like specifically like differently from regular errors, where we only log them at a very low verbosity level. And I think you might be seeing them more in end-to-end tests because our end-to-end tests are set at a very high verbosity on purpose, so we can see everything. But most users, if they don't increase the verbosity level like explicitly, they wouldn't get those errors at all in their logs. And they're not getting marked as errors in the events either. So if you're a normal user and you're not increasing your verbosity, the idea is that you wouldn't even see those.
Oh, by the way, was there something in the PR you wanted to look at, Ash?
Yeah, I've sent you like another link. Maybe you
Yeah.
could click on that. I think that explains. If you go to role assignments.go, I can't see it here. If you go to like role assignments.go file,
Here we are.
yeah, you come down. Yeah, so if you see on line number 90.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is the place, where I had to actually pass in an argument because I, couldn't get principal ID without doing an API call. So
Yeah.
and then this role assignment spec, it just gets set into the, so we actually set into that role assignment spec struct this principal ID.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is the best way or better way, but this was what I could think of, right now. So yeah.
No, I think that's the only way we can try to get the client calls into the spec right now. Do you have any thoughts, Cecile, on stuff we could do to improve it in the future?
Yeah, sure. I'll just think about that. And like also if we in like specs, we have like 3 functions, like I can't remember the name, 3 methods. I was thinking, if we could have a method that actually returns a key value pair kind of thing, so that if required, we could fetch arbitrary fields from that particular spec. For example, I to get from that spec and get that because I had to now cast everything. So that was also one of the things that I was thinking about. Did you get what I'm saying? Like this last point?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. I think my connection is unstable. So what I was saying is that, we have 3 methods for this particular service spec. And I was thinking if we could have one more method that allows us to, get arbitrary fields based on key.
Yeah,
I mean, you never know. Yeah. I mean, that was just a thought when I was trying to do that. I thought I needed that. I did a workaround though, but yeah, that is also, these are the 2 things that I felt while I was doing this PR. I
Yeah.
will write it about, in a discussion and issue so that we have better context. And I'm breaking also. so
Yeah.
sorry about that. I think
No
my
worries.
internet is breaking now.
Yeah, I think the challenge here is that we get the specs in cluster.go or machine.go, but we need to do the client calls here because the way we set it up is the client calls. We have access to the clients in the reconcile functions. And ideally, we'd like to be able to get everything we need inside the spec getter, but it's not exactly super straightforward to try to refactor the client calls into a cluster.go. Yeah.
David, did you have something?
Yeah, this actually, it's a little bit of a rewind. So everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I think the first problem with errors, the transient errors particularly, is that we call them errors. So verbiage is important there, right? So if we are saying something is an error, then that likely means that there's something abnormal going on. I think we need to reflect on how we name that to reflect, as Shyam had mentioned, the insignificance of this type of behavior. The log level is also, I think, appropriate, right? We're using it's usually quiet, or at least it should be for most users. The transient errors are really just expected. Like, they are something that's expected, and we don't normally throw debug up to the user. And we just need to reflect on that and figure out exactly how we need to talk about it. I don't think that, like, adding documentation is good, but we can't expect people, like, people don't read the docs. Like, half the time they don't read the documentation, so they're going to see this and just be like, oh my gosh, there's something bad happening. So we need to make it clear, even to the most naive observer, that this is something expected and something that will eventually reconcile. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. So it looks like in when we're trying to check if the resource exists and we get like a not done error, for example, we just suppress it and return nil. So that maybe we could try to check to see if it's a not done error or something, and then at least return some log or set some flag to say.
I think at the higher level it would be more appropriate. So where we actually report it in the reconciler is probably, like, at the top level of the reconciler, we catch these and we handle them differently based on what type of error it is. It's good to send these back up because the reconciler needs to know, hey, I need to queue myself up for a later time period. And that's okay. That's good. It's just how we're reporting them at that level, I think.
If you look at the Azure Cluster Controller, the link I sent earlier, we are doing, like, we're not calling it an error if it is an operation not done. So I think there's like 2 types. There's transient errors that are actually errors. Like, for example, we send a call to Azure and Azure gives us a, internal service error, try again later. Then that's a transient error that we want to handle and then try again. But then there's operation not done, which we're like kind of disguising as an error. because of how it allows us to like try again later in the controller, but it's not really an error from the user perspective. It's completely expected, as David said. So for that one, we're like treating it separately on its own. And Jonathan, if you can go to Azure Cluster Controller at in the reconcile in the controller. That's
Oh, okay.
yeah. And then look for transient or inside the reconcile at the bottom. Go down, I think probably reconcile normal is right. Yeah, right there. So see how it says if it's transient, then there are two cases. Either it's an operation not done or it's not. And then if it is an operation not done, we don't use the word error on purpose, right? We say the reconcile is not done. We don't say error, the reconcile is not done. So I think we're sort of trying to do that. I don't know if it's still like too aggressive to the user. Or if you have suggestions for improving that.
Was that to me or to David?
David, probably.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that last part.
No worries. I was just saying, like, we are like not treating operation not done as an error. Like to the user, like the user facing log doesn't contain the word error if it's a operation not done. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and if V2 is really the right error level, so maybe that's like a V4, and in fact, transient failure is a V2.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's just getting that out of the eyes of folks. I mean, we want that there, right? We want that there for debugging so that we can understand what's going on. It's just, what level and how we word it. And in there, I think wording it appropriately. The transient failure is something that we probably want to bubble up a little bit higher, because that's a little scarier. Like you said, you could imagine they're throttling errors or something like that. You want to be able to let somebody know, hey, there might be something else going on.
I wonder if transient failure should not even be V2 and should just be V1, and then operation not done is V2.
Perhaps so.
Any other questions for Jonathan? All right. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for showing this to us. This is recorded, so if anyone missed this, they can check it out. And if anyone has feedback on doing this kind of form of code walkthrough every once in a while during office hours, please let us know. We're trying this out for the first time today, but if there are any other topics that people would like to see, or if anyone wants to volunteer to show something up and like do a demo or do a code walkthrough of a specific area of the code, that would be awesome. So please reach out. All right, let's just go through the rest of our agenda. And then we have a couple of items. All right, Windows Docker-Shin end-to-end failures. Gosh.
Yeah, I was not able to understand like what's the failure with Docker sim. So I just wanted to check, has there been any flaky fails with this? Like I couldn't make sense of the logs when I saw like what's going wrong. And the PR that I've raised, I don't think it anyhow impacts. It is just a customized change. So I should have linked the PR.
Yeah. I don't think we're aware of a like known issue with the Docker-Shin end-to-end test specifically. So yeah, if you could link the PR maybe in the test failure link in Slack, and we can help you take a look. James, I don't think you're tracking anything either, right?
I haven't noticed anything major, so.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to do this on Slack async. I'll just
You can ping me.
just post that.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Take a look. It might be a flip or it might be something. Cool. And the other one is me. I just wanted to let everyone know the conformance test on Kubernetes main branch started failing overnight yesterday. It was it's due, we think, to, well, we know due to kubeadm merging a PR in Kubernetes main for 124, which removes the master role on nodes, and it's deprecated in favor of control plane. Control plane has been there for a while, but they just finally pulled the plug on master. And we had some usage of master still in cluster API and CAPZ, which is causing this to fail. James and I were looking into this yesterday, and we have this like in progress PR for CAPZ to add the control plane taints and tolerations for metric server and Calico, which are in CAPZ. And then I also realized this morning there's also a PR in cluster API, which actually has to do with KCP, which is required for this to work for 124. So I'm talking to folks in the cluster API channel right now. We're probably going to do a patch release for CAPI to get this PR out, so we can consume it in CAPZ and fixed components.
That's why it wasn't getting set to true, because it was finding that.
Yeah, this is actually the root cause, and I think our changes are still required anyways, but this was probably what we were seeing in the first place. So yeah, just a heads up. Any questions? In terms of testing in general, there are a few flakes recently which we've tried to address. I think we're in a better place now, but please continue to report flakes if you see them. And if there's especially like patterns of flakes, feel free to open an issue and we can try to deflake our tests as much as possible and get towards a more signal. So we made some good progress on the periodic jobs, but there's still some work on the PR jobs. Right. Does anyone else have any topics, any questions that they want to bring up? Okay, if not, I guess to close, two things. First thing is we're planning on releasing 1.2 at some time next week. There are two PRs that we're hoping to get in before then. First one is the Azure cluster template type, which will help us support cluster class in CAPZ. And then the second one is the conditions, making sure we only show the right conditions if like a resource was actually created. So Jonathan has a PR open for that. Should get merged soon. And besides that, I know there are a lot of PRs open. We probably can't wait for every PR, but if anyone has like a specific PR that they think is really important and should go into the release, please, please, please tell us ahead of time so we can plan for it. And if not, there will be another release after that. So it's will be fun. Yeah, don't worry about not getting your PR in the specific release. And yeah, we did not do very well at doing the milestone planning this time around. I think we kind of let ourselves go on that side and forgot to create a new 1.2 milestone when we started the cycle. But for 1.3, I think we should try to be a bit more on top of that and make sure that we're putting stuff in the milestone that we want to see in the release. And we can discuss like release cycle length, I guess, once we release 1.2, but I'm thinking around 1 or 2 months, kind of what we've been doing seems to be working. So let's try to work around that. Okay, and then I guess last thing is next meeting is going to be on March 3rd. I will add the agenda now. I'm going to start trying to add the agenda for the next meeting at the end of the previous meeting so people can add items and stuff as they come up. And then also I would love if someone could volunteer to host the next one. That would be great. And if anyone has a code walkthrough that they want to give, please reach out. So I will leave this here, and everyone, if anyone wants to sign up to facilitate, please write your name down. All right. I think that's all for today. Any last minute comments, questions, concerns? Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your week and a great long weekend for those who have a long weekend. And Jonathan, thank you again for doing the code walkthrough. Super useful. And see y'all online. Bye.
Bye.